In recent days, the American economy has been rocked by a series of unprecedented events that have left both seasoned investors and everyday consumers reeling. It all began when Donald Trump boldly declared, "I'm saving America with tariffs," a statement that seemed to ignore the silent and swift freefall of the stock market. A market that, as if controlled by an out-of-control airplane, nosedived without warning. Almost immediately after news broke of a rumored 90-day tariff pause, the S&P 500 tumbled more than 20% from its February peak, marking one of the sharpest declines in history. Just minutes later, when Trump denied the rumor by dismissing it as fake news, the market sank back lower in a manner reminiscent of a ship desperately searching for brakes on turbulent waters. This economic chaos, fueled by tariff policies, represents not merely a brief moment of market volatility, but rather a widespread disruption that has left retirement accounts vanishing almost as quickly as the headlines. Investors, watching in disbelief, have been left to ponder the unexplainable mess caused by policies that many now describe as non-serious. Even critics find it ironic that when attempting to counter what he perceives as trade abuse, Trump's approach has instead thrown the nation's economic foundation into disarray, a scenario that might have been imagined by a financial strategist with a penchant for dramatic irony. One can only wonder if America is saving itself, or if the price of these tariffs is ultimately being paid by the very citizens who believed in promises of revival. While the president's formula for characterizing trade partners may have once been touted as innovative, it now appears to have backfired, leaving the economy teetering on the edge. In an analysis that might have been drafted by someone who once studied economics in more stable times, it becomes clear that the market reaction was not the one anyone had hoped for. Instead of a measured, incremental approach to achieve his domestic policy objectives, Trump's sweeping actions sent market confidence plunging, leaving American consumers to bear the brunt. Tariffs designed to protect domestic industries have turned into a multifaceted crisis, one that is inflating prices, upending retirement plans, and shaking the very pillars of national economic trust. Businesses, once buoyed by a sense of economic stability, are now caught in a downward spiral as prices for everyday essentials rise and unemployment mounts. From imported electronics to clothing and even food, every item seems to have fallen under the shadow of Trump's tariff regime. Major companies like Apple, Tesla, Qualcomm, and Whirlpool, all heavily dependent on global supply chains and international markets, have suffered severe blows to their profitability. A staggering 34% tax on American exports has left these corporate giants struggling, and even small businesses are finding themselves ensnared by a system where the cost burdens eventually trickle down to the average consumer. While investors watch the markets plummet and families question whether their hard-earned savings might ever recover, the president himself appeared unfazed. His stance, as communicated from the comfort of a golf course during a 54 tournament funded by Saudi money, has only deepened the divide between political rhetoric and economic reality. At a time when people are facing trade wars and soaring prices, Trump remains in denial, insisting that everything is fine, an assertion that has led many to remark, with a touch of sarcasm, that perhaps if his golf swing were as decisive as his tweet storms, the country might be in better shape. One might even say that his economic strategies have turned an already challenging landscape into a veritable roller coaster that is thrilling only in the sense that it makes you question every decision you ever made about the future. Across the border, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has emerged as a figure of resolve, condemning the reckless actions of the United States. In a firm and calculated response, Canada declared that it would impose a 25% tariff on all U.S. cars that fail to meet trade agreements such as USMCA. Unlike the unpredictable measures coming out of Washington, Carney's strategy is underpinned by careful planning and historical experience, notably guiding Canada through the tumultuous 2008 financial crisis. His message to the American leadership is clear. Unfair trade practices will not be tolerated, and nations around the globe are prepared to retaliate in kind. This robust reaction from Canada sends a strong signal, not only to Trump, but also to the broader international community, that unilateral actions have consequences beyond national borders. The unfolding events have now escalated into what some analysts call a full-blown trade war, with over $6.4 trillion of market value evaporating in a mere 48 hours. As major stock indexes like the Dow Jones and the S&P 500 plunge, families across America are witnessing their life savings shrink by margins as high as 15% in just a few weeks. The collapse of financial security, coupled with a pervasive sense of uncertainty, is prompting many to ask the all-important question, will we ever be able to retire comfortably, or has the promise of an economic revival become nothing more than a pipe dream? In the midst of these turbulent times, it is essential to pause and reflect on whether the current policies are taking us toward a brighter future or setting us on a collision course with lasting recession. Despite the dire economic indicators, some voices remain supportive of Trump's policies. Proponents argue that his approach to protecting American jobs by imposing tariffs is a necessary measure in a globalized world. However, such defenses ring hollow for many observers when confronted with the stark reality. Inflation is rising, consumer goods are becoming more expensive, and the cost of living is spiraling out of control. Even financial legends like Warren Buffett have publicly dismissed the notion that these tariffs could have any positive long-term impact on the economy, instead warning that the measures will only serve to penalize working families and honest businesses. In a particularly ironic twist, high-profile media figures have also weighed in on the situation. Fox News, once a staunch supporter of the administration, now finds itself grappling with the fallout from Trump's tariff policies. Even as some hosts attempt to placate anxious viewers with assurances that the market is merely correcting itself after a period of overinflation, others are beginning to express genuine concerns over the shifting economic landscape. The internal discord within Fox News, coupled with the increasingly volatile market performance, paints a picture of an environment where political loyalties are being tested by the relentless pressures of economic reality. Adding to the complexity of the situation are the surprising and bizarre elements introduced by the administration, such as tariffs on penguins and uninhabited Arctic islands. These puzzling decisions have left experts scratching their heads and the public wondering whether the president fully comprehends the breadth and depth of his actions. The inclusion of such odd provisions only magnifies the sense of disarray that now permeates discussions on trade policy. It is as if the administration is engaged in a high-stakes experiment where even the most outlandish theories are given the same weight as carefully considered economic strategies. Meanwhile, as everyday Americans brace themselves for the impact on everything from groceries to cars, major U.S. companies are faced with a harrowing choice: raise prices to remain solvent or suffer massive losses that could further depress an already faltering economy. With tariffs slapped on everything from electronics to clothing, the cost burden eventually lands squarely on the shoulders of consumers. One can't help but laugh bitterly at the irony that in a bid to protect domestic jobs, the administration is instead setting the stage for a scenario where car prices could rise by anywhere between $2,000 and $15,000 per vehicle. It's as if the nation's collective wallet is being held hostage, an outcome that only deepens the public's frustration and disbelief. In such tumultuous times, it is important to pay close attention to the international response. The decision to impose a 25% tariff on all non-compliant U.S. cars has provoked a strong reaction from German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who criticized the move as not only an economic provocation, but also an affront to long-standing trade values. German car brands such as BMW, Audi, and Mercedes-Benz, which collectively facilitate $35 billion in exports to the U.S. each year, now face significant challenges. Consumers in the United States are likely to see price hikes of $5,000 to $7,000 per car, a reality that will force buyers to reassess their purchasing decisions and may ultimately shift market dynamics in favor of alternative motor brands from other nations. The ripple effects of these tariffs extend far beyond transportation. Countries like Japan, the UK, Australia, and members of the European Union have responded decisively. The EU, for instance, is considering imposing tariffs as high as 30% on U.S. agricultural products, soybeans, beef, and corn being among the chief targets, which could affect exports valued at around $12 billion each year. Tech giants like Amazon, Apple, and Google may also find themselves facing tariffs of up to 20%, putting pressure on an industry already grappling with fierce global competition. These sweeping measures suggest that the trade war, far from being contained within the borders of the United States, is poised to escalate into a global crisis with far-reaching implications. As we analyze these developments, it is difficult not to notice the paradoxical messaging emanating from the White House. On one hand, officials continue to insist that tariffs are not a tax on the people, but a necessary tool to shield American industries from trade abuse. On the other hand, the tangible results are clear. Everyday products are becoming more expensive, businesses are reeling under mounting costs, and the American way of life is being upended by a lack of coherent policy. The vice president, who once declared that the United States was about to see an economic transformation that would cut taxes for American workers and create a more favorable environment for domestic companies, now finds himself forced to defend a strategy that appears increasingly disconnected from the struggles of ordinary citizens. For those of you following these developments closely, if you find value in a comprehensive, unbiased exploration of the economic policies affecting millions of Americans, consider subscribing to our channel, liking this video, and leaving your comments below. We strive to provide thoughtful, in-depth analysis that not only informs, but also invites dialogue on these critical issues. It's a sincere invitation for you to join the conversation and share your thoughts on whether these tariff policies are merely an attempt to make America great or simply a recipe for economic disaster. Political pundits and economic experts are divided. Some, like Howard Lutnick, a prominent billionaire in finance, defend the tariffs as a necessary measure to protect American workers, while others, including Paul Krugman and Rand Paul, caution that such policies will only lead to deeper economic pain. Critics argue that a more sustainable path to economic growth lies in policies that encourage innovation, investment in infrastructure, and a business-friendly environment, rather than resorting to protectionist trade warfare that isolates the United States from its global partners. The question looming over this entire debacle is whether President Trump's policies can be reversed before the situation spirals irreversibly into a severe recession. In a climate where even former allies are questioning his approach, it seems that the presidency is now defined as much by unpredictable tweet storms as it is by economic data that spell uncertainty for millions of citizens. Adding a further twist to this complex saga is the realm of social and mainstream media. Jamie Foxx, whose impressions of Trump have gone viral, has inadvertently captured the essence of the president's rhetorical style, so much so that his imitations have sometimes drawn more acclaim than the original speeches themselves. In a world where even the most imprecise mimicry can spark debates on policy, one might sarcastically observe that if only Trump's policies were as refined as Jamie Foxx's impressions, perhaps economic stability would be within reach. As controversies continue to swirl on social media platforms like Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook, the public is increasingly bombarded with conflicting messages, each one contributing to an overarching sense of distrust and confusion regarding America's economic future. Beyond the echo chambers of cable news and social media, the tangible effects of these policies are becoming starkly apparent. In just 30 days, the S&P 500 dropped by more than 7%, wiping out approximately $2.3 trillion from the market, while the Dow Jones Index fell nearly 1,500 points, the most significant drop since the beginning of the year. For millions of Americans, these dramatic numbers translate directly into diminished retirement funds, with some seeing their 401k accounts shrink by as much as 15%. This is not merely a case of numbers on a screen, it is personal. Families across the nation are forced to confront a future in which the value of their savings is eroded by policies they did not vote for, and where economic uncertainty now overshadows long-held promises of prosperity. What further complicates the narrative is the way in which political messaging has evolved, or rather devolved, into an endless series of justifications and retractions. The president's public statements continue to oscillate between assurances of imminent revival and careless dismissals of the economic pain suffered by ordinary citizens. With every angry tweet and every boast of having saved the country, the disconnect between political rhetoric and lived reality widens. The result is an environment where citizens are left to wonder whether protecting domestic industries through such drastic measures was ever a sound strategy or simply a misguided display of political bravado that has only succeeded in alienating international allies and confusing domestic markets. As the international community gears up for what now appears to be an all-out trade war, the impact on global supply chains is becoming unmistakable. Major economies such as Japan, South Korea, and Australia have already signaled their concerns, and it is estimated that 90% of global trade could be affected by these tariff policies. In a scenario where retaliatory tariffs are levied not only on consumer goods, but on key export sectors such as agriculture, technology, and digital services, the entire interconnected network of global commerce teeters on the brink of disruption. This is a development that demands attention, as it underscores the broader stakes involved. An interconnected global economy that now faces the real possibility of fragmentation and prolonged uncertainty. Even within the corridors of traditional political power, the continuing fallout from these policies is raising difficult questions. With key Republican strongholds in states like Florida and Wisconsin beginning to waver, there is genuine concern over whether Trump's unapologetic stance on tariffs has weakened his support base just when it matters most. As voters confront rising living costs alongside dwindling economic opportunities, the long-term political repercussions are becoming as uncertain as the future performance of the stock market. The administration's insistence that tariffs will eventually lead to a stronger economy rings hollow when balanced against the very real hardships faced by millions of Americans. In assessing all these dynamics, one is forced to confront the possibility that the very strategies designed to protect American jobs and industries may instead be ushering the country toward isolation and economic decline. When the cost of imported goods rises uncontrollably, when families grapple with the shrinking of their nest eggs, and when global allies retaliate with countermeasures that cut deeply into American exports, the promise of making America great again transforms into the harsh reality of making everything expensive again. So what do you think? Are these tariff policies a necessary measure to protect American interests? Or are they merely sowing the seeds of an economic catastrophe that will be paid for by every American at the checkout counter? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is as important as ever as we navigate these tumultuous times. In sum, the tariff debacle that has gripped the nation is a multifaceted crisis, a collision of political ambition, economic strategy, and global interdependencies. With stock markets in free fall, international allies taking a stand, and everyday Americans confronting ever higher costs, the situation demands not only sharp analysis, but also urgent recalibration. Some might compare the current administration's approach to a high-stakes game of chance, played without regard for the long-term consequences, while others argue that the chaos is simply the price of a robust defense against global competition. Regardless of one's ideological leanings, the facts remain unassailable. Trillions of dollars have disappeared, retirement funds are dwindling, and the American dream is being reconfigured into something far less secure than it once was. If you're finding this detailed analysis insightful, please consider subscribing to our channel for more in-depth coverage of events that shape our national landscape. And don't forget to hit that like button and leave your comments. Every reaction helps us bring even more clarity to issues that directly affect your life. Despite the cacophony of political rhetoric and the ever-changing messaging from the White House, the underlying economic realities are stark. With global tariffs threatening to unravel long-established trade relationships and domestic policies increasingly isolated from the needs of the hardworking citizen, it is becoming ever clearer that an urgent reassessment is needed. The future of the American economy now hangs in the balance, marked by uncertainty, unpredictable market swings, and a series of decisions that may have irreversible consequences. In this historical moment, as we witness the union of dramatic political theatrics and devastating economic impacts, only time will tell whether these policies will be seen as bold moves in the face of global competition or as catastrophic missteps that have set the stage for a new era of economic instability. As we continue to monitor these developments, one thing is certain: the stakes have never been higher, and the price that every American ultimately pays is both literal and figurative.